I really hate admitting how much my creative work pays me, but I'm going to do it in this video. And I'm going to throw in a few other finance-related confessions as well, because the relationship between creativity and happiness and fulfillment and money is a thorny one, and I think we need to talk about it. Strap in, folks. This is not going to be your standard how much YouTube pays me video. We are going in deep. I'm Jen Tatro, and this is From Jen. Back in 2010, these two Princeton researchers, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, published a study that you hear cited all the time as proof that money doesn't buy happiness. What they discovered was that the correlation between money and happiness looks something like this. See those three blue lines? They represent subjects' responses on their levels of stress, how often they experience what they call blue feelings, and how often they experienced positive affect, or things like happiness and smiling and joy. You can see that all of those evened out right around the $75,000 mark. That yellow line was a response to the question known as Cantrell's self-anchoring scale, or just the ladder. Here's what that question was. Please imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom of the ladder represents the worst possible life for you. On which step of the ladder would you personally feel you stand at this time? Now, all of these results together ended up being interpreted as, well, people feel like their life is improving as they have more money, but they're not really any happier after about $75,000. Or, as got parroted for years afterwards, money does buy happiness, but only up to $75,000 a year. Then, and stick with me here, in 2021, another researcher named Matthew Killingsworth blew all of that up when he did a similar study and found that no, the relationship between money and happiness actually looks more like this. And as you can imagine, the media was all over that. But it doesn't end there. Just last year, in 2023, the authors of both those studies got together and they did what they called some adversarial research, where they worked with a third neutral arbiter and they reanalyzed all of their previous data to see who was wrong and why their conclusions were so different. It turns out it all came down to the specific questions they asked. I'm not going to go into every detail here because it's wonky and nuanced, but if you're interested, I will link all three papers in the description. But in short, they were both kind of right. The people who started out unhappy didn't get any happier after that $75,000 mark. Those who weren't all that unhappy to begin with, they saw their happiness continue to rise linearly. So the data only really makes sense if you think of unhappiness and happiness as two separate states rather than the one being the lack of the other. Money only goes so far to ease the state of unhappiness, but it helps a lot to increase the state of happiness. That's not the best news for those of us who life circumstances or genetics are predisposed towards unhappiness. And there's research out there that says about 60% of our happiness levels come from those two things combined. It's also honestly not great for most of the rest of everyone either, because according to Indeed, very few fields are paying average salaries above Kahneman and Deaton's threshold, especially when you consider that in today's money, that's over $100,000, not $75,000. And creative arts definitely is not one of those fields. I wondered what it would mean for our happiness if we weren't paid highly, but just fairly. One thing we know about fair pay is that relative wealth makes a difference in how happy people are. There was a 2020 paper by Michael W. Krauss and Jacinth Tan, and they described a connection between our subjective socioeconomic status and happiness that was way stronger than that between our objective status and our happiness. That is to say, they discovered that our pay is way more likely to make us happy if it feels good compared to the people around us. And another survey by Indeed found that almost 3/4 of workers actively research to determine if their pay is fair. In that same survey, 82% of workers said that they were more engaged and fulfilled with their work when they felt like they were paid fairly. And 81% said it also made them more productive. So most of us have an idea if we're being paid fairly, and that comparison has more of an impact on our happiness, fulfillment, and productivity than any actual objective measure of wealth. Good to know. This is the part where I tell you about how much I'm paid and my own tangled relationship with money and happiness. So let's just rip off the Band-Aid. These are what I'm looking at as the revenue streams and potential revenue streams for my content creation work. There's the YouTube Partner Program, which pays creators for the advertisements that run on their content. There are affiliate links, which is when you click on a link in my description and buy a product from there. There are sponsored videos, and then there's direct subscriber support from places like Substack and Ko-fi. I also have expenses. Those things are things like subscriber incentives, software subscriptions, and my domains and hosting. This doesn't take into account any equipment that I bought for filming or lighting or sound, which is actually quite a bit, but those are sunk costs, so we won't talk about them. So, how does it add up? At the moment, I make nothing from the YouTube Partner Program. And I won't until I meet their threshold for subscribers and watch time hours. Although I use affiliate links, I have yet to earn any income from that. I have not had any sponsored videos. And my direct subscriber support, my only source of income from my online content creation, is right around $205 a year. On the expenses side, I spent $189 so far this year on subscriber incentives. This is the first year that I've done that. My software subscriptions are $31 a month or $372 a year. And I spend $240 a year for the domain and hosting of my website. That all adds up to $801 a year for a grand total income of negative $596. That's right. It costs me money to do this work. Is that being paid fairly? Well, on average, I put in maybe 15 hours a week to publish one YouTube video and one Substack post, and all of that time is completely unpaid, which does seem unfair. It seems a little bit less unfair, though, if you start looking at what a typical YouTuber makes. YouTube expert Alan Spicer estimates that at most 0.25% of YouTube channels earn more than $50 a year. Do I believe I'm in the top 1/4% of content creators? At this point, I've made 171 videos for YouTube, and I've been uploading somewhat regularly for about 3 years. I don't know. It is what it is, and I'm not there yet. Over on Substack, between 5 and 6% of all subscriptions are paid. My personal conversion rate is closer to 2%. Once again, it's not really about fairness. The numbers do tell me where I stand compared to other people on one metric, but they don't take into account myriad others. They don't take into account the number of hours I put in, or my education, experience, marketing savvy, or sheer raw talent. So after all that is said, I'm not paid well for my work. But I have another confession. I don't actually need to be paid for my creative work. The less quoted part of the thesis in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own is that in order to be a writer, she says a writer of fiction, but I would say in this day and age, any sort of creative, it helps immeasurably to have money. Woolf says it outright in her very first paragraph. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. And in fact, later she details her own circumstances due to an inheritance left to her by an aunt. She says, "No force in the world can take from me my 500 pounds. Food, house, and clothing are mine forever. Therefore, not merely do effort and labor cease, but also hatred and bitterness." And later she writes, "By degrees, fear and bitterness modified themselves into pity and toleration. And then in a year or two, pity and toleration went, and the greatest release of all came, which is freedom to think of things in themselves. That building, for example, do I like it or not? Is that picture beautiful or not? Is that, in my opinion, a good book or bad? Indeed, my aunt's legacy unveiled the sky to me." When my husband Kevin died 4 months ago, he left behind a life insurance policy large enough to provide me with a basic income, basically in perpetuity. Is it enough to buy and do whatever I want, whenever I want? No. But it is enough to keep a roof over my head and food in my belly. And by degrees, it might also be enough to turn fear and bitterness into an unveiled sky. But I'm not there yet. And I suppose that's where the complicated feelings come from. If I'm okay, if I'm not going to starve or be homeless, do I have any right to even expect pay for work I'm doing that I love? Can I even say that I should be paid more when I chose a path that honestly only rewards the most elite of performers? And if I'm able to be both financially stable and doing work that I love, why does not being paid for it still make me feel kind of bad about myself? It seems like I know a lot about the scientific study of money and happiness, but very little about how money and happiness work for me. I thought perhaps if I did all this research and filmed this video, I'd come to some realization, but I haven't, except to say that this stuff is more complicated than even a stack of university research can parse. My grand conclusion here is that there is no grand conclusion. But hey, now you know how much YouTube pays me. Until next time, I am wishing you love and joy and all those good things, and I can't wait to talk to you again.